The participant numbers are running up. Gordon, it must be because of you. They must all be because of you, I'm assuming.
I think it's me or my looks, one or the other.
Yes, probably both. All right, as more numbers come in, we'll just let that happen, but I think we should go ahead and start. We've got 2 hours for today's webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you very much for joining us today for our CTPAT and AEO Q&A webinar. My name is Sean Beddoes. I'm the Vice President at CT Strategies. I spent 22 years in CBP, 6 of them specifically in the CTPAT program. My colleagues, Brad Skinner and Rich Loria, also had long careers in CBP, which included significant time working in and managing the CTPAT program. In fact, Rich, I think, is the all-time leader and has spent more than 20 years in the CTPAT program. And finally, our colleague, Gordon Wright, brings over 40 years of expertise in customs and trade, to include authorized economic operator programs, and he was instrumental in the US-EU mutual recognition negotiations. We asked you all to submit questions ahead of time, and thank you very much for doing that. We will work our way through the questions you submitted, but we will also answer questions that you asked during the session. So let's cover a little bit of housekeeping first. We certainly have a good number of people online based on the registration numbers as well. We're expecting a good crowd. If you have a question during the session, we simply ask that you type it into the Q&A tab here in the Zoom app. And let me answer the first question even before it's asked. We are recording this webinar, and it will be made available to you through our YouTube channel after the session. We will attempt to answer all of your questions, but we only have 2 hours to do so. So if we run up on time, we will absolutely provide you with the answers to any outstanding questions via email after the session. Brad has just a short announcement to make in Spanish, and then we'll continue on. Brad, over to you.
Very well, Sean. Muy buen día a todos nuestros colegas de México, Latinoamérica. Bienvenidos a este webinario de CTPAT. El formato el día de hoy es muy informal. Vamos a contestar preguntas que sometieron los participantes antes del seminario y dentro del programa el día de hoy. Pedimos que echen sus preguntas y está muy bien en español en el chat y lo contestamos lo más que podemos durante el seminario. Y Sean comentó que después de este seminario se va a proporcionar un recordatorio de webinario. Entonces van a tener la información, recibir todo después del seminario. Okay, Sean, I think that I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I was just responding to a question that came in, or not a question, a comment. Somebody said, Jeff said, the audio sounds like the reverb is on. I'm not sure if it's me or the broadcast. As far as I can tell, at least on my end and my colleagues, everything's coming through clearly. We did have some reverb issues individually when we logged on, and a couple of us had to log off and back on. So Jeff, you may want to try doing that, log off and log back on to see if that helps it. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, so finally, before we get started, please remember that we are former CBP officials and former customs officials. And while we have years of experience and good reach into the programs, for some of your CBP policy specific questions, we will answer them, but please just keep in mind and consider that our answers will be unofficial, as we're not still representing the U.S. government or foreign governments. So we will do our best to give you the best answers that we can, but I just wanted to provide that little piece of information. All right, so let's jump right into it. Rich, we're going to start with you. Can you provide some advice on how to cope with an upcoming revalidation, but because of the shutdown, we do not know when it will happen? Over to you.
Okay, good question. Again, don't be stressed about it. At the end of the day, this is CBP, CTPAT's responsibility to get these scheduled. I understand, with the shutdown, you still get nervous because you don't know when this is going to happen. Shutdown is over now, so all I'm going to say is, just be prepared. But again, these things won't happen overnight. Budgets still need to be established. There's still a lot, a lot in the background that CTPAT will have to prepare. How they're going to attack the validations coming up. If you're due for a validation this year, doesn't hurt to communicate with your SES. Give them a call to see if there's a plan. They have to provide you at least 30 days notice, if they're thinking of doing a validation this year. It's getting late in the year. It's we're in May already. The fiscal year, they're running on, the fiscal year. It ends in September 30th. They have to get this year's done. So again, it's late in the game. If I was still a director, if I was still in New York, if I was still in New Jersey running the office, what I would be doing right now, I would be looking at my certified companies and trying to group them to try to get as many done because those require an on-site visit. So, with limited budgets, I'm not sure what the budgets are. They're going to want to bang out a lot of companies in a certain region. So what are those regions? In New York and New Jersey, I know what I had. I had a lot of certified companies in, say, Canada, Mexico, India. So maybe I would be looking at, some of my certifieds in Canada and Mexico and just try to bang out as many as I can. And then maybe for the validated companies, again, late in the year, you may be doing those virtually. They really don't want to roll over as many companies this year. From what I remember, it was a low year. There weren't a lot of validations that had to be done this year, but next year is going to be a heavy year. So I think, the program probably wants to get as many done as possible this year. So again, communication is probably the key. If you do for a validation, it doesn't hurt to reach out to your specialist to see if they have any answers.
All right, Rich, thank you. We're going to keep going with you on a few of these. Is there any data on which country gets on-site evaluation by CBP the most?
Yes. So CTPAT does have data on that. What happens is when a specialist sets up a validation, they have to enter the visit information into the portal. The visit information includes the address of the company that they're visiting, with the country, and CTPAT can run that data on any time. It's important for the specialist to enter this information because we don't want to be going to the same facilities, over and over again. So what happens is when the SESs are setting up validations, they'll look into this part of the portal and to see if a location was visited. So, but they do have that information.
Very good. Rich, I'm going to throw you a curveball, but I'll take the first pass. It's the first question that we got in live. So the question is, due to the building operation, I can't permanently segregate the shipping area with a fence. Would it work if I use temporary fences or retractable lines during the loading process and remove them afterwards? First of all, fencing is not a requirement. So anything that you do based on risk and based on what's possible within your operation is already going above and beyond what's required. So obviously you do have to ensure that the cargo handling area has limited access, that your access controls are enforced and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you can't put fencing, you can't put fencing. Your suggestion of using some sort of temporary fencing, that's great. And quite frankly, that could be identified as a best practice, depending on the totality of your operation. But yeah, the quick answer is yes, you could do that. Rich, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, you're correct. No, as long as you segregate it, you have access control, procedures in place. Your answer is correct, and what they're doing is fine.
Great. Thank you. All right, Rich, continuing with you. How does congressional funding affect CTPAT certification and canceled validations for 2026? And then it says foreign versus domestic audits. I guess that's part of the question.
Right. So the program needs the congressional funding. That's how it runs. Basically what happens is every fiscal year, the fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th. The program has to get funded. How does it get funded? It gets funded by Congress through, I believe the money goes to, say, DHS, and DHS will divvy out the money to the various programs, So CTPAT would get a budget, and that's how they would operate during the year. What has happened a lot is they're not getting that budget in the beginning of the year for the entire year. So the program has been running on, say, what they call a continuing resolution, a CR. And what happens is that could run, like, say, from October 1st to November 30th. Then the CR ends, and what happens at that point? They get a limited budget during the CR. And then what could happen after that is either the CR gets extended to another date, the budget gets passed for the entire year, or there's a shutdown. And that's what happens. And during a shutdown, travel is very limited. There is some travel. It can be approved, but again, very limited. During a CR, the same thing too. There has been travel during a CR, but budgets are limited. And then, we're really just hoping for that budget for the entire year. It's difficult to operate, well, obviously during a shutdown and even during a CR to try to plan things. But now the budget's been planned, passed for the rest of the year.
Yeah, well, hopefully the funding will come through and things will get
Mhm.
started here soon. Because, like you said, there's just not a lot of time left in
No.
terms of work plan, annual work plan.
Yep.
So we'll see. All right, you can take a break for a second here, Rich. I'm going to move over to Gordon here with some AEO questions. Gordon, what AEO levels, so that's AEO C, AEO F, AEO S, are equivalent to CTPAT? And what's the best directory to search for AEO compliant organizations? I guess that means companies, probably. Over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I know it's confusing when partner countries that have got a mutual recognition agreement with the states have different levels of different numbers. It's difficult to match them up.
Mhm.
So basically, the distinction between those three components is AEO-C is AEO custom simplification, AEO-S is AEO security, and AEO-F is AEO full, which is a combination of the security and the custom simplification component. So a company that has got AEO full can get the benefits associated with simplification and with security. The ones that are compatible with CTPAT are AEO security and AEO full, not AEO custom simplification.
Okay, and just to be clear, the CTPAT compatibility with those two is still only in the security aspect of it. So AEOS, yes, clearly that's security.
Yeah.
AEOF includes security, so that piece of AEOF
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
compatible, right?
So if you've got an AEO full, they've met the full AEO security criteria. So
Okay.
they're the two that are compatible.
Great.
You will not get any benefits associated with AEOC.
Right. Thank you. All right, Gordon, this is funny. This is like a CTPAT question through the context of AEO. My company will receive CTPAT exporters validation. How and when will my AEO client receive benefits?
Okay. Well, first of all, as a CTPAT exporter, that will be recognized by the European Union, and the risk scoring for that CTPAT member will be reduced accordingly. So that means they should benefit from priority clearance, priority inspections, but a lower risk scoring. So they should enjoy less inspections actually. When their partner company has AEO status, the security and full status that we've just talked about, their risk scoring drops even further. So they have even less inspections and so on.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go back to Rich for one here. Rich, are there any plans for Vietnam to join CTPAT in the near future? I think they're talking about mutual recognition on that, obviously. Over to you.
Right, right. I mean, obviously, Vietnam can, or those suppliers in Vietnam can join CTPAT, just not eligible. So when I was with the program, one of the areas we were looking at was to, possibly sign further MRAs, mutual recognition arrangements with Southeast Asia and Vietnam. Again, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. These were areas that, were being looked at. Doesn't happen overnight, though. There's a process before we can sign a mutual recognition arrangement. You got to see if they have a program in place. You got to see if it's compatible to CTPAT. But Vietnam was definitely being looked at because Vietnam is really a country that CTPAT probably right now visits, besides Canada and Mexico, probably Vietnam, maybe India is probably one of the top countries that CTPAT is visiting. So it would make sense to sign an agreement with them as long as their program is up to our standards, because it would save resources, budget and stuff. But yeah, Vietnam definitely something that's being looked at.
Yeah, I know that when I was with CTPAT, I think I went 3 different times to Vietnam
Yeah.
validations. So yeah, like you said, there's a lot of suppliers that are supplying CTPAT importers from Vietnam.
Yeah, when I was putting together the work plan, we always had a lot of Vietnam companies.
All right, Brad, over to you, sir. What's the best way to ensure our business partners are compliant with forced labor regulations? Is there a platform or a list?
Yeah, certainly. Colleagues, good day from Houston, Texas. It's great to be with you all. To level set for this, to answer this question, let me first say, recall in the CTPAT minimum security criteria 3.9, that's business partner, it states that members must have a documented social compliance program that addresses the prevention of forced labor. So there's no single best way to ensure that your suppliers, your business partners are compliant with not using forced labor, nor is there a single government-approved platform or universal safe list that guarantees a partner is free from forced labor. Really what the program expects is for members to demonstrate a risk-based, well-documented due diligence process that demonstrates that they understand their supply chains, who's touching the cargo, and that you take reasonable steps to prevent the forced labor. I think an effective approach could start with using U.S. government resources to identify risk. The U.S. Department of Labor publishes a list of goods produced by child labor or forced labor, which highlights particular parts of the world, countries, industries where forced labor is known to exist. So you could screen against that. In parallel, if you're sourcing out of China, I would suggest you certainly need to be familiar with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention list, and more specifically, Department of Homeland Security has a list of entities that are linked to forced labor in China. So certainly creating, companies that are on that list creates a presumption that the goods are prohibited from import into the United States. I know there's some international resources as well. The International Labor Organization maintains a free platform. And then there are pay-for-service platforms, colleagues, that, I work with companies, EcoVadis, Altana, Moody's, that many companies, depending upon budget and resources, which will assist companies to identify risk for forced labor and even do some of that tracing that is required back to the raw material level. I would say you want to make sure that you're getting written certifications from your suppliers confirming that they're not using forced labor in the operations. A lot of times that'll involve like a vendor code of conduct and sending that to the vendors and getting them to sign off on that. I've seen instances where importers provide training to suppliers as a part of that effort, as a part of ongoing resiliency conferences. And all throughout this, you want to make sure that, your commitments are embedded in contracts, supported by ability to audit the facility, and that they flow down to those tier 1, 2, 3 subcontractors. Independent audits, document reviews, validation of recruitment, labor practices, all would be in scope to ensure that you're conducting that due diligence. I'll leave it there, Sean. I think that covers the high points.
Thank you, Brad. I'm going to pivot to some questions that came in online here. First one, good morning. We submitted our annual CTPAT profile review on time, but it has been showing pending SCSS review for 5 months. Like we said in the beginning of the call, we're former CBP, so I can tell you my honest opinion of that is that's unacceptable and a bit embarrassing as a former CBP official. It should not be sitting there for 5 months. That said, the positive side is them not reviewing and accepting the security profile submission is not going to affect your status whatsoever. So really the only thing that you can do is just send an email to your supply chain security specialist and just ask them if there's anything else that they need so that they can review the submission. But ultimately your status remains the same, and that's really on CTPAT to get that done.
Sean, can I just inject on that point?
Yeah, please. Absolutely.
I was looking at a company, their security profile, very same circumstances. So for Miss Overgoen, you're not the only one. That's my point there. More or less what we pieced together so far is because of the shutdown, some supply chain specialists, took it very literal about what they can or can't do. And so it just was pending, that final review and approval in the system. But as you pointed out, Sean, it's just really wait for them the supply chain specialists to take the next step over.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, Nancy, we all have clients within our service packages that have experienced this or are experiencing this. I have 2 right now that have been waiting for months. So it's unfortunate, but I guess to some degree you could potentially blame the shutdown and some of that. But anyway, next question is, do CTPAT verification requirements only apply for importer of record? This question is only regarding importers. I will admit that question is a little unclear. Do CTPAT verification? I'm not sure if you mean validation instead of verification. Han, can I ask you to just clarify that question in the chat, and then I'll circle back to it. Next one, my last CTPAT validation was in 2023, and my next validation would be, or should be, I guess, 2027. But in the CTPAT portal, it shows 2028 as the validation schedule. Has the time between validations been revised? I'm going to kick this to Rich. The time has not been revised. It's at least once every 4 years per the Safe Port Act. But Rich might have some insight from his previous position.
Yeah, the time hasn't been revised, but I've seen I think it's more of a glitch in the portal. I mean, it could have something to do with now we changed to the fiscal years. We were doing validations on calendar years every 4 years based on the calendar year. Now it changed to the fiscal year. So that could have picked it up and changed it to 2028, but I would say be ready in 2027. That's, if you were done in 2000, and again, I'm not sure what month you were done in 2023. Was it in the beginning of the year up until September, or was it at the end of the year, September to December, but it sounds like you're going to be on the 2027 schedule.
All right. There's a question here, important question, what you already made. I want to know if it exists a platform with videos about what is the best way to control tracks in the plant, how many cameras we should add to our loading process to be compliant. So I don't know if this was a question that was sent in advance, but I know that I have at least a very similar question to this in advance. So I'm going to get to this answer a little later in the session. So let's just put a pin in that one. What is your advice for US, EU, UK companies sourcing from China on how to navigate Chinese blocking statutes and the recent countermeasures introduced last week with factory cooperation with supply chain security audits and UFLPA due diligence? Brad, do I dare kick that over to you since you were just talking about the forced labor? I don't know if you have any additional information.
Yeah, tough question. I think this gets to some of the geopolitical issues that are out there, and China not allowing third-party audits of facilities to include for social compliance issues, forced labor, corruption, and whatnot. I guess my quick reaction to that is, at least from a CTPAT member perspective, document everything that you do to try to establish that forced labor is not being utilized. Again, a questionnaire, a conversation, and maybe using a third-party platform to give that tracing ability. And then if you run into roadblocks to gather that information, just be sure to document it. And if and when, either through CTPAT or some other government audit mechanism, you'll at least be able to explain what you did or why you weren't able to do it. That would be my take on it, Sean.
Thanks, Brad. And Gordon, I don't know if you had anything to add, just because the EU and UK was included in that question.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the forced labor regulations, they're also a feature in the EU and the UK. And what the AEO program is slightly different in the way it approaches it. It basically says, and I'm summarizing here, that in order to be an AEO, you need to be compliant with all legislation. But it doesn't include it directly into the AEO type legislation. It just says, go and have a look at it and make sure that you are compliant. So similar to what Brad said, when companies who have an EU establishment with AEO status are being validated, they will ask the questions about the way the company's managing forced labor risks. And I would repeat what Brad said to them. That would be my advice, to make sure there's no one answer to that. There's several ways that you can get to actually demonstrating you're meeting the requirement. But the types of due diligence that Brad was talking about would equally apply to the EU and UK.
Okay, thank you. Boy, thank you all. The questions are coming in hot and heavy. I'm starting to think that we should have had a 4 or 5 hour webinar. There was a change in the validation dates based on annual 4-year of calendar date. Is this actually pushing ours out a year, as it looks like, or still a 4-year? So I think Rich just answered that question. The bottom line is Safe Port Act says validations have to occur. Well, revalidations have to occur at least once every 4 years. Special circumstances have happened before, like you can imagine during the pandemic, where some of those were pushed out beyond the 4-year cycle. So there's no official change, but from time to time, based on operational needs, they do have to push some of those out. as a manufacturing company, do all our facilities need to comply with CTPAT rules or only the ones that import and export internationally? Rich, I'm going to kick that one over to you.
Yeah. As a manufacturing company. So, yeah, I would need a little more information on that. So, I mean, are you saying you're a CTPAT company? You're in the program as an importer CTPAT company. You have manufacturing sites, but some of them don't import or export into the US?
Yeah,
Yeah, Sean,
go ahead, Brad. Because
right. And we had a similar question come up pre-submitted, so hopefully we'll be able to address that. I think what we may be talking about, I'll at least use the Mexico example, which I'm familiar with. Large international company, several plants in Mexico, some of which export to the United States, some of which are either for domestic consumption in Mexico or feeder plants to those plants that are exporting to the US. So, I mean, my first answer to that question is, from a risk standpoint, definitely focus your efforts on those plants that are exporting to the United States to ensure that they're complying with the minimum security criteria. Now, ideally, from a corporate perspective, I would say it would be good that those domestic plants, those feeder plants, are following minimum security criteria to the extent possible, especially that transportation focus area, I would say would be important. Sealing of containers, inspecting of containers, access controls into the facility. Yeah, I think I get the point that it's probably those loads are going to be offloaded somewhere in country and then shipped either to the US or used for production facilities. But ideally, you would want to push it out to all of your facilities. Over.
All right. Thank you. All right. Han clarified her question from earlier. I would like to clarify my question. If a company sells products that are imported into the US by another company who acts as the importer of record, only the company who acts as the importer of record has the responsibilities to conduct supply chain verification activities. Well, let me just make that a little more simple. Only the CTPAT member and their IOR number or numbers is going to be receiving the associated benefits with that membership. So if you are importing something, but someone else is acting as the importer of record and they're not CTPAT and you are, then you're missing out on the opportunity to get those benefits. Also, if you're a CTPAT member and somebody else is importing under their IOR for some of your shipments, then it doesn't change the fact that you still have to meet the minimum security requirements to be a member. So I hope I answered that one. I don't know if anybody else has additional comments on that. Okay. Please elaborate on the supply chain written review component, upper management section. So this is a must. And I think right in the MSC, it says it doesn't have to be complex. I'll tell you what I typically recommend to companies that, struggle with understanding this is per the CTPAT process, as a member, you're required annually to review your portal account and specifically review your responses to the security profile questions and the supporting documents in the security profile. That is happening annually. Now, if you as part of your process to do that review as the owner of that portal account for your company, hopefully you're coordinating with other key representatives of departments in your organization. And you're asking them to review, for example, the cybersecurity section, you're asking the IT manager to review the responses and the supporting documentation to make sure that it's all still applicable and still accurate. I see that, in my opinion, as an internal review process. So you can leverage something that you're already doing for CTPAT to actually meet that requirement. Now, you may want to capture that in a very simple document that just shows who was involved in the annual review and which sections they were responsible for, and then you can archive that into the portal as a supporting document. Rich, I'll ask you if you have a different view on that, but
No, that's good. Again, that section really that's new to the MSC, the upper management responsibility. That was added in 2020, and the CTPAT program just wants to make sure that upper management is supporting supportive of the program. It's not just one individual of the company, but actually maybe a team involved. I've seen a lot of companies or in the portal where it's just one person, one POC. That POC leaves, and then after that POC leaves, nobody knows what CTPAT's about. We call the company up and like, hey, you guys are scheduled. Oh, the POC just left. Well, there's things you need to do, and then the company basically says, well, we really know nothing about CTPAT, and again, so that section was really just added to make sure that there were more people involved, with the program, and there was more knowledge. They wanted that upper management support, and again, a CTPAT team is great, or like you said, cybersecurity, or people from different departments. So
All right, sounds good. I'm going to pause on the live questions coming in. I'm going to go back to some of the previously submitted questions, and then I'll just keep bouncing back and forth. Brad, I think this one's for you. Please provide examples of the social compliance program. What is recommended beyond training?
Right. And I'll refer back to some of my earlier comments. But first of all, the fact that training is occurring, excellent, both internally within the company, and I'll assume some sort of external training with suppliers. And that your training needs to be, what is forced labor? What's the definition, indicators of forced labor, et cetera. So that's a great first step if you're conducting some sort of socializing forced labor within your organization with the folks who are involved in selecting business partners need to know. Big picture wise, your social compliance program needs to guide corporate decisions, change behaviors, and generate documentation that can withstand regulatory scrutiny, both internally as well as externally facing. A lot of times companies will post their social compliance, their code of conduct, social or a supplier code of conduct externally on their websites. I would say, clearly written, senior leadership approved policies, statement explicitly prohibiting forced labor is good. Supplier code of conduct written as well as embedded in contracts, also good. Doing some sort of risk-based supply chain mapping of the products that you import to the United States to identify high-risk geographies, areas, commodities subject to perhaps forced labor. Then I think the last point I'll make here, and if you're for my colleague who asked that question, the U.S. Department of Labor actually has something they call Comply Chain. It's on the Department of Labor website, and I would say go take a look at it. There's a lot of information, but in there are sample templates of code of ethics, supplier code of ethics. There, I think Levi's is just one I remember off the top of my head. They've actually referenced that as well. So I would take a look at that. it's not a certification program per se, but if you're just starting to build up that social compliance program, I would take a look at all that information there, build a framework, and take it in small steps. Over, Sean.
Thank you, Brad. All right, I'm going to take one of these myself. The question is, should the wood packaging material supplier be considered a critical business partner? Well, one could argue that all suppliers can be considered critical in the context of CTPAT, in the context of supply chain security. But in terms of being compliant with the CTPAT agriculture security requirements, identifying this partner as being important absolutely makes sense, because untreated wood poses a significant risk to agriculture security, which of course is connected then to U.S. economic security. Keep in mind that if wood packaging material is unmarked, it's considered to be untreated and therefore non-compliant. And the regulation allows for immediate export of non-compliant wood packaging material. It does not allow for fumigation and remediation. So it's, I guess, all that to say that if you're not doing your due diligence with a wood packaging material supplier, it could end up being quite a headache for you on the receiving end, and actually end up costing you quite a bit of money, because if you do run into an issue with wood packaging material compliance at the border, then all the associated fees with that are going to be charged to the importer of record. So I guess that was a long way of saying yes. Let's see here. The next one, for partners that are CTPAT certified and visible in the portal, are security questionnaires still required? No, security questionnaires are used to determine security compliance for your business partners who are either not CTPAT and being monitored through that SVI feature, or not AEO from one of the countries that the US has an MRA with. I think we're up to 19 countries now, and the list is available on the CBP website. And yeah, this is often misunderstood by members that unnecessarily are sending out questionnaires to business partners. If a business partner is CTPAT, then that's your proof, right? They've met the requirements. It's when they're not in those categories that you have to find out if they're meeting kind of those critical security measures for CTPAT that are associated to your cargo moving through the supply chain. All right. Let me pause for a second. I'm going to go back over here and take one or two of these questions that are coming in live. For an IOR validation, to what extent does CTPAT take financial or accounting procedures into account? It's a little confusing. I will say this and then ask Rich to follow up, or Brad. The financial stability of a company is taken into account during the vetting process, initial vetting and recurring vetting. How much is it part of the overall equation? That has probably changed over the years, certainly since I've been there. So I don't know, Rich, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I exactly understand the question, but I wouldn't say, yeah, we'll look into the company to make sure the company's, I guess, like you said, during the vetting, there's no debts owed to CBP, maybe bankruptcy, but I wouldn't say the financial piece is a big part of the validation.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
and I would
context of AEO, it is. Go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to concur with everything that's been said. I think in the security context, in the CTPAT world, for your financial and accounting departments, I think it's mostly to the extent that they are involved or contribute to selection of business partners, reviewing for financial, checks, they need to be at least have some sort of awareness of what CTPAT is and security. And, basically what we're trying to prevent from their side of it is false documentation being presented to the government, trade-based money laundering, those types of things. So I think it's really about building awareness within those departments as it relates to security. So I'll leave it there, Sean.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. For CTPAT video recording compliance, is the 30-day retention requirement applicable to all cameras or only those covering critical areas? Well, first of all, I don't think the 30-day is a must. I think it's a should, if I remember correctly. At the end of the day, CTPAT wants to make sure that the recordings are retained for a period of time so that if you had some type of incident occur, that there would be, you could go back to the recordings as part of the internal investigation. That could possibly include external folks as well, like CTPAT, if it was a supply chain security incident. So it's really kind of a floating number based on your operation, where you're sourcing from, and all of that. So at the end of the day, you have to make a decision what works best for you within the context of your operation and the technology you're using. But in my opinion and experience nowadays, these systems and the ability to retain recordings for a long period of time are quite affordable. So you should be able to certainly have at least 30 days and often 60 to 90 days retention. Rich, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, you hit it. Again, it's really the 30 days more of a, not a must, but more of a recommendation. We'd like to see it. I mean, if it's possible, all areas, should be there, not just the critical areas. But again, it's really your system should be able to handle the 30 days. But again, this is more of a recommendation.
All right. This next one, I'm going to combine a question that came in with a question that we got previously, and this is for Brad. So the question that came in is there a general rule of thumb for evaluating risk to determine which upstream suppliers should be evaluated physically versus a survey? And then the question that came in advance was, when doing risk assessments, what are the key points that we should be reviewing? Ours currently is set up based on ACE data. So they're in the same category. Good luck, Brad.
Let me see if I can tie that all together here, folks. And it'll take me a moment, so bear with me, because risk assessment's a pretty, in and of itself, a pretty broad question. But and and we receive this a lot. I know risk assessment generates a lot of questions, confusion perhaps at some times. So as far as reviewing ACE data, mind you, that's a great starting point for risk assessment, because that helps you understand your shipment volumes, your country of exports, your overall trade patterns. But the risk assessment needs to go beyond just volume, shipment volume numbers, right? So you need to be able to map each step of the process, identify who is involved in handling the cargo, understanding where risks may arise, specific country threats, transportation risks, security vulnerabilities, and have a clear picture. You want to map, right, all of your variations, maybe demonstrate differences between full container loads or less container loads, a single factory that's shipping to multiple ports, changes in transportation modes, air versus ocean. When you're mapping, you want to certainly identify the names, addresses of the business partners, their role as a manufacturer, consolidation, transportation point, and what you know about that supplier, right? So are they CTPAT, maybe a CTPAT consolidator or the AEO, BASC, certified, other certifications. And if they directly handle, how long the cargo may be at risk at each or at rest at each node, and who selects that business partner. It can be very involved, that mapping process, right? I've seen Fortune 500 companies, multiple supply chains, hundreds of them, all parts of the world. Definitely going to be a team effort for the point of contact, whoever's conducting that risk assessment, with working with procurement, logistics, and particular business partners, consolidators, 3PLs, to reach back to get to that point of stuffing or loading the container, usually done in a matrix format. What I've seen highway carriers that do Google Map routes from a plant, say in Querétaro, Mexico, all the way to the border. Okay, and then you're going to do your threat assessment, taking into account open source information. There are a lot of U.S. government lists that you can, take a look at. State Department or has country reports for threat assessment. There's the Department of Commerce Consolidated Screening List. That's a good resource. I'm familiar with something called the FM Global Resilience Index. It's a free tool that helps, identify risk for security, cargo, theft, smuggling at different points along the way. A lot of companies will use a third-party provider to provide that service. Okay, so now let's just go back, I guess, to the question about high-risk suppliers. Okay, so if I were to look at it, first of all, what do I know about the supplier? Do they have a certification? Yes or no? If yes, lower risk. If not, and I think this goes back to your point, Sean, about the whole questionnaire, right? If they're not certified, then that's where you probably want to, kick in with a questionnaire of some sort to that supplier. And if you have multiple suppliers, use risk-based approach. Maybe, you view Bangladesh as more risky than Canada. Don't have to do them all in one fell swoop. You can use a risk-based approach. Take the first tranche that you think are the most riskiest, send the questionnaire, work with that supplier. Are they complying with the minimum security criteria? If they're not, maybe they're not properly sealing or inspecting the containers. Maybe there appears to be some weaknesses in the physical security perimeter. That's where you want to work with them, document what's going on. And then you just keep moving through based upon your own logical assessment of risk through those suppliers. And then all of that, I guess I would just say, CTPAT has developed over the years something called the 5-step risk assessment. It's in the portal. You can find that for the members in the portal. You can find it there. But it's also on the website as well. I would say, you can use that as a basis for conducting your risk assessments, or maybe you have another methodology, which would be perfectly acceptable as well. The key point here is that it's documented, that it's repeatable, and that there's proactive action based upon where risk is identified to strengthen that supply chain security. And if you can communicate that, colleagues, to your supply chain specialist during the validation, I think that'll go a long way towards a successful validation. So I try to crunch a lot there, right? Sean, we do, a lot of training. This is a very involved risk assessment, are very involved, but I would just kind of hit those points for now.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for that, Brad. Okay, I'm going to try to tie that earlier question into this question that I received in advance. So the earlier question was talking about the number of cameras should be put in place to observe the loading process, to be compliant with AEO and CTPAT, and then a question about trainings, if there's a good place on the web to see about 7 points and track the container. So I'm sorry, so it's not 100% clear here, but in terms of the training, the CTPAT actually has on the public CBP website some training videos, specifically a training video for 7-point inspections, and that is, I believe it might even be available in a couple different languages. So that's that part of the answer. Now let's go back to the cameras. So the question that came in that connects to this is, how many video cameras per export dock do you consider a good infrastructure in terms of CTPAT and AEO? So there's no specific, prescription for the number of CCTV or cameras to have in place per export dock. If you have a CCTV system, then obviously you need to ensure that you ideally have a sufficient number of cameras that are strategically placed to be able to capture the container inspection process, the cargo loading process, and the sealing process. And depending on your operation, this could be one camera, or this could be several cameras, or this could be multiple cameras per door. So it really depends on the type of operation, the layout of the facility, and then the capabilities of the cameras that you have in place and the infrastructure that you're dealing with. So unfortunately, it's not a clear answer. Gordon, I don't know if you want to add to it from an AEO perspective, if there's anything additional.
Yeah, just from the AEO perspective, the approach is relatively similar to the US. The first thing to say is that goods that are being subject to any customs procedure, being exported or imported out of the country, they have to be separated from domestic goods. And those separated goods that are for international intention, if you like, they have to be subject to physical security requirements, whether it's fencing, cameras, etc. You can have them in the same facility, but you don't have to have the same level of oversight over both of them. There was a question part of the question I forgot to answer, Sean. So if you'll permit me,
Sure, please.
to just jump in on that, which was my fault, really. And that was the question about how you can check EU AEO status of a company
Oh, right.
or UK AEO status of a company. But there is on both the UK government website and the EU's Commission website, there is a list of approved AEOs in both the EU and the EU countries. So if you do a simple Google check AEO status in the EU of a company, it would take you directly to that. All the companies listed on that in the UK database are in real time. So when a company gets approved, it goes on there. If you've been told by a company in the EU or the UK that they're in AEO and they're not on the list, that is a strong indication that they have not been certified. And I'd further add, you may want to rethink whether you do business with them.
Very good. Thank you. Going back to the live list here, and Rich, help me jump in on this one. In cases where video footage is lost due to server failure, maintenance, or system interruptions, what documentation must be maintained to demonstrate compliance with CTPAT standards? So the first half of the question, the second half seemed to pivot a bit. So to me, this would fall under the category of a reportable incident. So something happened, you lost the video footage, for a legitimate, IT reason. At that point, I would send an email to your supply chain security specialist, just sort of like that serving as the documentation, saying, hey, we had this issue, but we had no security issues during that time. But unfortunately, we've lost access to that footage. And that way, you have something in writing, and you have something they can respond to and tell you if they need anything additional. And then ultimately, if you were to have a validation, in that same time frame, and during the validation, they wanted to review some of the security recordings, there would be this written explanation of why a day of recordings is missing. So that would be my answer. I don't know, Rich, if there's anything else you think of.
Yeah, no, that would be fine. I mean, you could just do, the best you can, and by reporting it, at least you have something, some type of documentation, just, to just if I have a question. Again, is it ever going to be questioned? Probably not, but at least you'll have something in writing. At least you'll say you reported it and you did the best you could. But that's fine.
All right, let's see. I haven't read this whole question, but the beginning of it's got me cracking up. DHS is a very large organization. The reason I was cracking up is I read as I turned my head, instead of large, strange. DHS is a strange organization. And I thought to myself, that's a fair assessment. Does CTPAT interact with other divisions about organizations in various DHS programs? Does participation in various DHS programs help how a company is evaluated by DHS? There's a lot going on in that question. I can tell you for CTPAT, there is a formal relationship with TSA, because there are overlapping facilities that TSA visits for security audits that are also CTPAT members. And there's coordination between TSA and CBP or CTPAT for those companies. And there have been many cases where TSA actually conducts the validation on behalf of CTPAT. And basically what they do is they just do their own normal job, which is checking all the same things that CTPAT would, and then they report those findings to CTPAT so that they can count that as a validation. Rich, I don't know about any other formal relationships. I know that there was some work being done with FDA many years ago, but
Right. It's like that whole trusted trader concept. Yes, it would look, by your company participating in various programs. Yeah, I mean, it would be definitely favorable. It would, it would be a good look, if you say you're part of this program, that program, and that program. And CTPAT does work with, different, like you said, the TSA, USDA, FDA. So they do work with different divisions, and by your company being part of these different programs, yeah, it would definitely be favorable. Again, it's not gonna influence the validation. The validation is going to be the validation, but again, it is something that would be favorable.
okay, thank you. Brad, I was looking at the next question here, which is specifically complimenting your response about forced labor. And then it says Brad's going to answer this question live. I don't know if you had anything else to say.
So I was going to respond in writing, but couldn't figure out how to, once I clicked the wrong button. But anyway, Mr. Potts, thank you for the comment, and spot on in something that in more involved discussions on forced labor, always try to point that out, that there are NGOs out there that do country reports, excellent resource source. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as a great resource for anybody building a social compliance program. Over, Sean.
Thanks. Gordon, I'm going to go over to you. We had a question come in just asking about the changes to the AEO program. You guys call it track and trace or trust and trace or something. I forgot what it's called, but they're just asking if what those changes are, if you could just run through them.
Yeah, I mean, similar to the US CTPAT program, the EU and UK programs evolve over time. And we just had a good example of it. We were talking about how forced labor's now starting to become a feature within the programs and so on. In the European Union, they're having a major change to their legislation at the moment, and it's really being driven by e-commerce, the huge number of e-commerce packages coming in. So they've had to take a completely relook at how they manage the importations and exportations from the European Union. On the positive side, they've at last sort of recognized that some companies with really high compliance, records of compliance with customs procedures and other legal procedures are not receiving the benefits that they should do. So in the new legislation, that will enter into force really over the next 5 to 6 years. There is a new type of AEO in addition to AEO-C, AEO-S, and AEO Full, and it's called AEO Trust and Check. Now, a company that manages to attain that status will be able to move away from transactional customs. And what that means is that they will no longer need to submit customs declarations. Their goods will arrive in an EU port, and unless they've been selected for examination, they just go straight to their premises or to where they're offloading the actual cargo itself. And on a periodic basis, once a month or once a quarter, they will submit a return, a very simple return, which will look more or less like a spreadsheet or whatever new invention takes over from that, to a centralized customs administration that's being established. And duties and taxes will be collected by deferred account. Now, on the flip side of that, in order for them to enjoy that benefits, in addition to having a strong record of compliance, they will need to open their systems to customs administrations remotely, so that customs administrations, if they've got any concerns, they can go and data mine and look through the data and so on. The full details on how this will work in practice, will know more information within the next 6 months or so.
Thank you very much. Brad, I'm going to go over to you. This question, it's a little incomplete, but it says pallets, storage, safeguarding, protection, control, question mark. So I think it's about pallets.
Right. So let me make a few broad comments, right? Big picture wise, we're trying as a CTPAT member, trying to prevent narcotics being built into those wood pallets. We've seen this. I was on the US-Mexico border for many years. Pallets, heroin in compartments within the wood pallets. And then also from an agricultural perspective, preventing wood-boring pests entering into the United States via those wood pallets. So on all of those points, I think it's a lot of common sense kind of approach, focusing on making sure that the pallet storage area, that it's secure, from an access perspective, that the pallets are clean, that they're compliant. And by compliant, I mean, ISPM 15, having a stamp indicating the facility that either heat treated or chemically treated those pallets. If pallets are stored outside, keep them off bare ground. Most facilities nowadays have asphalt, gravel within there, but something, maybe putting a tarp underneath the pallets if they're stored outside, covering them up at night, to prevent that, I think would be a good practice. And then, certainly inspecting or segregating non-compliant pallets, ISPM 15 wise versus compliant pallets within the facility, making sure you're not shipping anything to the United States using non-compliant pallets. And then just kind of the team at the facility, make sure they're doing that, they're familiar with the ISPM requirements, that they're doing routine inspections, looking for missing stamps, signs of past wood boring. You can usually see it, a little tracing within the wood pallet. But if you do that, again, common sense, that will go 99% of the way of ensuring compliance from a CTPAT perspective. Over, Sean.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm going back and forth, all these questions. I'm just going to touch upon, we've talked a lot about the video recordings, but I'm just going to close out this last one here. Regarding video recordings at loading and unloading area, what is the time recommendation regarding storage of those recordings? If you think about the CTPAT supply chain, so point of loading to point of unloading, basically where the seal gets put on the cargo or the the container for the cargo and where that seal gets broken and the cargo comes off. However long it takes for that shipment, you want to make sure that your retention time on the cameras, the recording times are maintained for that period of time, plus probably a week. And the idea there is if an incident occurs, security incident, anywhere in that supply chain, then you can go back to video recordings, if the incident happened at like the point of loading. So you want to maintain them for long enough to address any incident that you may have in that particular supply chain. All right, let me close that one out. This was an interesting one that came in. What are all the physical security requirements? So that's an interesting one. I don't think there's an exact answer, as strangely as that sounds, for this, because in the CTPAT minimum security criteria, there are shoulds and musts that we always talk about. But sometimes if you say yes to a should, then it generates musts. So there's not really a solid number that you could come down on. But basically, the requirements for physical security are relatively broad. So you must have physical barriers in place and or deterrents. And these must prevent unauthorized access. Gates and access points must be manned or monitored. Have adequate lighting inside and outside. If you use security technology, then you must have written procedures for governing that use, and it must be physically secured from unauthorized use. And if cameras are used, they must cover key areas, and the footage must be randomly reviewed and documented. Some of the things that you should do, again, not requirements, you should have perimeter fencing. You should prohibit POVs from parking in or near cargo areas. Obviously, in some facilities, that may be an impossibility. You should use security technology. And if you do, you should use licensed and certified resources for the design and installation of that. If you're using security technology, it should have, alternate or emergency backup power so that it can continue to operate if there's a power loss. If you're using cameras, you should deploy them in areas to deter unauthorized access. If you're using cameras, you should have a notification feature to alert the user if a camera is malfunctioning. And if using cameras, recording should be maintained for an appropriate amount of time, which we've talked about quite a bit here. So hopefully that gave a relatively decent answer to that big ask there. What are all of the physical security requirements? That was a good one. Let's see, I'm going to pivot back over here. Rich, I'm going to throw this one to you. In terms of the minimum security criteria, what are the key focus areas for brokers who handle cargo via warehousing? What areas may not be as applicable?
Well, yeah, I mean, not all brokers handle cargo, if I'm understanding this question correctly. But at the end of the day, the MSC still must comply with all sections of the MSC. I mean, but if you handle cargo, some of some of the items that may be more important now, say the physical security, maybe for a broker who didn't handle cargo as much, would the physical security be as important? Maybe not, but if you're handling cargo, now obviously the physical security becomes more important for the warehousing. The access controls becomes more important for the warehousing. The transportation piece maybe become more important for the again for the broker. If you don't handle cargo, what CTPAT expects is that you're pushing that out to your business partners. But if you're actually the person handling the cargo, then other sections are going to be more important. But at the end of the day, you still must comply with the MSC in all the sections. So they're all going to still be applicable. They are all applicable. But again, physical security, access controls, transportation may be now more important to look at. If
All
that
right.
makes
Then
sense.
if I could just, I would just
Sure.
add on to Rich's comments for a customs broker that also operates the warehouse. I would include their seal verification, right? If that warehouse is the first receiving point of the international cargo, verifying that the seals are intact, matching them up against any manifest information, identifying anomalies, reporting. I would include in that category. For me, that would be important for that,
Yeah,
for the warehouse part of that operation.
right. No, thanks for pointing that out, Brad.
All right, Rich, I'm gonna ask you this one from previously submitted. In light of these known vulnerabilities for ISO 17712 2013 certified high security seals were bypassed using mechanical leverage and torsion techniques, specifically using cloths and specific rotational movements, often leaving no immediate visible trace of tampering. Does CBP still consider the current ISO 17712 testing protocol sufficient to determine high security, or is there an upcoming revision to the standard to address these bypass methods? That was a mouthful there, Rich.
So, I mean, from what I'm aware of, I mean, again, the MSC hasn't changed, the minimum security criteria hasn't changed. So, I guess the short answer is yes. I mean, there's still, the testing is still sufficient, but we do, or CBP, CTPAT does recognize that, that the seals can be manipulated. There's definitely ways around. You could break a seal. You could counterfeit seals. So CBP, CTPAT is aware of it. But again, the short answer is yes, the testing is still good, and the seals, the high security seals, still meet the minimum security criteria. We do recommend the VVTT, the view verified tug twist process. When you're putting a seal on, make sure the seal's been put on correctly. And then you just have to have really good seal procedures in place. Again, we do understand that it's not, it can still be manipulated, but you just got to, just try to do your best and, just have good procedures in place.
Yeah, Rich, and I would add to that, effective training on seal techniques and trends can be an excellent tool, really, for mitigating this threat, because the bad guys, they're really good and very creative when it comes to compromising seals. And so ensuring that your relevant staff that handle these procedures are well aware of these techniques can really be the difference maker. There's a training video that we use in our training that was put out many years ago, but it's still incredibly relevant, and it shows like just the multitude of techniques for compromising seals in different ways. So I would say training is really, really important on this.
No, that's a good point.
All right, Rich, got another one for you, and I'll give you a break. Is the industry moving to, oh, well, this kind of dovetails. Is the industry moving toward a mandatory integration of electronic seals or e-seals? Or, sorry, the typing's off on that, or monitoring devices to compensate for the physical limitations of traditional bolt seals?
I mean, is it going to be mandatory? I don't know. Since the beginning of the CTPAT program, I mean, electronic seals have always been discussed and researched, but it hasn't been a requirement. I mean, costs, infrastructure, a couple of reasons, reliability. Are they giving you accurate information? Through the years, though, the technology definitely has gotten better. I was on a call not too long ago, and a company was showing us these electronic seals, and I was pretty impressed. But I would have to say, I don't think it's going to be again, it's going to be a requirement, but you never know. But right now, I haven't heard of any making it a requirement.
All right, thank you. Brad, long-standing CTPAT validated company gets bought and expanded across the country. New locations, not members. What do we do?
Right. So let me attempt to answer the question from my own experience, and I think I can relate to the question. You know, I'm familiar with what, for instance, let's say an existing CTPAT importer that is either bought out or merged with another company, new facilities, both in the United States as well as in Mexico, kind of integrated under the umbrella, or a highway carrier, US Mexico highway carrier, expanding, opening up new trucking terminals, both on the US and the Mexico side of the border. So if you find yourself in that circumstance, what are some things to consider? Well, first of all, you know, you want to your portal account, especially the business entities. I would suggest making sure that the portal is updated to reflect these new business units, right? And I think Rich kind of talked about that earlier. You know, the different manufacturing facilities, the different terminals, their addresses, because that'll all be key information for the supply chain specialist eventually down the road when determining where a validation is going to occur. But if I were to broaden that out a little bit, you know, if I were in that situation, I think I would, you want to assess security at all of these different business units and locations. And are they following the same security procedures? And are they documented? Is the mothership, the whoever is in charge now, are those corporate policies being pushed out to the facilities? And do those facilities follow those procedures, as well as implement their own localized procedures? If not, you want to correct those gaps. Large corporations, I've seen, develop overarching corporate guidelines for access controls, issuing of badges, personnel selection, container inspections, lighting, which camera technology to use or lighting. But each facility is going to be unique, right? Where, how many lights, how many cameras, is the perimeter fencing sufficient? Does it need to be updated, and so on? Again, that's going to be risk-based, depending upon the number of facilities, where they are, who's direct shipping to the United States, some of those earlier comments, and then just go facility by facility to get them up to speed. If it is and I'll just use an example of a Mexico manufacturing plant that's relatively new to the organization and previously was exporting to the United States, that company is potentially in scope for a foreign site validation, right? So are they following minimum security criteria, and take it from there? And then after that, it's just the high level points. Corporate providing the leadership to the business units, training as needed, all of the tools that the different business units need to ensure. And then we talked a little bit about audits earlier, right? And then you'll want to conduct your audits of facilities, again, based upon risk as you go forward. So those are a couple of things I would keep in mind for a company that finds themselves in that situation, Sean.
Thanks, Brad. I think this next question it's like a continuation of that. I'll take it. I also think it addresses a question that came in from Eugenia. So the question is, what are the most effective methods to close the gap between compliance and real operations? So I think Brad mentioned a lot of this already. Obviously, internal audits, scenario-based tabletop exercises, mock validations, particularly if you're a company that's been through a validation, then you have an idea of how the process goes. So you could just, pull up the minimum security criteria and just go through that process internally. Red teaming, so testing some of your systems, and obviously training are all effective methods for closing that gap. It was amazing when I was conducting validations for CTPAT. It was shocking how many times I would go to a facility, particular a business partner's facility, and I would discover that the CTPAT member had clearly never either been to the facility, which, you know, is understandable. You can't go to every facility, or they clearly had not done their due diligence. So you don't want to be in that situation where you find out the hard way. Let's see here. Rich, I'm going to ask you this one. What's next for CTPAT, and how do you quantify the benefits of being in the program to senior leaders within the organization? I think this also connects to a question earlier from Jeff about CTPAT struggling to identify the positive, you know, return on investment. So I'll let you run with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's really, you know, a two-part question. So I'll answer the, you know, where do I see CTPAT going first? So what I see the program expanding. I could see further expansion in the program, especially on, like, say, the domestic side. You know, there's a pilot out there for the 3PLs. I mean, 3PLs currently can join the program, but now there's a pilot looking at non-asset based and other asset based 3PLs. So I see the program expanding that way. I also see the international footprint too, expanding internationally with more you know, mutual recognition arrangements being signed. Again, we spoke about that earlier about Vietnam. So I see some expansion there. Um, Benefits are always being looked at. You know, that's always been, you know, through the years. You know, can we provide further benefits? Can CTPAT provide further benefits? So I see CTPAT looking at that still. I mean, again, that's always been looked at through the years. And I think just better, you know, modernizing processes through technology. You know, I could see the virtual validation piece being, you know, again, modernized. You know, right now, you know, we do what they do have the virtual validation process, but I could see that getting, you know, enhancing that. And just the validation process, how they collect that data during a validation, you know, I could see modernizing that through technology, just you know, simplifying things. The SCSs have a lot of work, and if they can modernize things through technology, you know, it's going to help everybody. Again, I don't know if you were at the conference last year, Jeff. I know that was a big topic, you know, this return on investment, coming up with the formula. From what I understand, no formula has been, you know, come up with yet. I mean, again, this is another thing that's been talked through the years, you know, how could I, you know, show my leaders that, you know, that it is a benefit being in the program? You know, where's the formula? You know, am I getting reduced exams? And hopefully you are, you know, getting reduced exams. And, you know, that's what you're gonna, you know, go to your senior leadership and saying, hey, when we were on CTPAT, you know, we were getting this many exams and now we're only getting this many exams. But yes, the program has lacked, you know, getting that formula and actually showing, you know, what is your exam rate? What is your exam rate compared to other, you know, other companies in the same industry? And that's something that has been lacking, and hopefully CTPAT will provide that, you know, because again, that's something that, you know, you need to show to senior leaders. If you're putting money into this program, you know, what's the return on investment? Is it worth it? But I always say, you know, one of the biggest benefits of being in the program is, you know, having a supply chain specialist, you know, having that voice, you know, to reach out to. If you have issues, you know, it helps. Trust me. If you're a non-CTPAT company, and you don't have that voice, you know, it could be very frustrating. I'm sure, you know, you call a number, you leave a voicemail, you never get a call back. But at least when you have a supply chain specialist, they could look into issues for you. And I've seen it help companies. You know, you know, the specialists have come to me with issues. I've reached out to people, and we've definitely solved a lot of you know, a lot of problems that companies are having. So again, that is just a huge benefit. And you know, that's something great to point out to senior leaders. You know, you have a voice, and you have somebody to look into problems for you. But
Yeah.
yes, that return on investment piece is big, but yeah, no formula yet, from what I understand.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, I know it's a area of frustration for
Mhm.
a lot of companies. I'll take this next one. About the training requirements for our transport company, is it sufficient to provide one annual training session? Yes. You make the requirement based on your operation. The bottom line is security training, according to the minimum security criteria, it must be provided to employees as required based on their functions and position on a regular basis, right? You define what regular basis is. I think all of us collectively here would agree that annually is a regular basis. And then the other requirement is that newly hired employees must receive this training as part of their orientation and job skills training. So, annually is a good baseline, but certainly in some cases, it may be necessary to administer additional or supplemental training more frequently. So it's just going to really depend on your operation. Rich, gonna throw one at you here. We are seeing a lot of theft on the rails. Anything we can do? I've learned that when our containers arrive in US ports, there's no checks on the seals. It gets on the rail, and somewhere along the way, our containers have been broken into, and we do not find out anything until the truck driver goes to pick up the container at the rail yard and finds the seal is gone. Any suggestions or better security for my containers?
Great question. I wish I had a great answer because again, heard about these problems so many, so often about, these rail thefts. The program is, I don't know if they came out with it yet, but they were updating the MSC for rail.
Right.
Did that, I should know that.
I don't think it's been released yet, but you're right.
Yeah,
That's something that's pending
right.
pretty soon.
And hopefully that could address some of these issues. Don't really know. All I could say, maybe put some more pressure on the rail, the carrier. But besides that, it's I don't really have a great answer for that. Again, I've heard of so many issues, especially in the last couple of years about all these rail thefts.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons that they're updating the MSC. Maybe that'll help. And again, besides that, maybe just putting pressure on, the carriers.
Yeah, it's a high risk environment and it's hard to secure. There certainly is a conversation to have here. And I think Rich, you and I were on that same call with one of those e-seal developers. And, certainly it begs the question of, could that be a potential solution in the rail environment? But then, who's going to deal with that increased cost of doing that? So.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
would just interject to gents, if I could. Richie made mention putting pressure on the rail carrier. I would, at a minimum, share that information back to the rail carrier, right? And put a little bit of onus on them to see if they do any verification that seals are in place along the route to the United States. You may not get a good response, or you might be able to get there, but at least push that back, inform them of what's going on. And we work with a couple of rail carriers that are CTPAT members. They act, right? If they've learned that for a particular route via to the U.S., particular types of container cargo, can help strengthen their own training and verification program as well. Just wanted to add that, Sean.
Thanks. I'll take this one. How do I submit my OAS certificate on the CTPAT portal for my application? So the portal allows you to upload and associate supporting documents, which you pretty much are required to do for a lot of the responses. You can either go to the Documents tab in your portal account and then upload documents into it from there, or you can click on the upload button within a specific minimum security criteria question in the security profile. Or if you've already uploaded the document in either one of those examples, you can click on the associate button that is also in the specific minimum security criteria question if the document has already been uploaded. Like I said, that way you associate it to that additional question. So hopefully that helped. Rich, CBP and the Scan Association have a partnership. Does this mean that a supplier that has undergone a scan audit is low risk?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's low risk, but it won't replace the validation. CTPAT will recognize it, but again, it's not going to replace the validation. It's like, even with a an AEO member, if a company is a supplier is part of an AEO program, we would consider that lower risk. But the scan part, and we would accept that validation, but for scan, yes, we would consider it lower risk, but CTPAT would still do a validation.
Yeah, I think to me, Rich, yeah, that's the difference is with the AEO programs, there's a mutual recognition agreement in place, right? So there's a legal agreement in place between the two countries to recognize each other's partners. So it's a formality. The scan is, they have a partnership. I guess maybe they signed an MOU, I think it
They
was.
signed an MOU, yeah.
Okay, MOU. And so to your point, in my opinion, operationally, the way it would most likely work out is if you have 5 suppliers and CTPAT is trying to figure out which one to go validate, and 3 of them have undergone audits from scan, they would probably take those 3 out of the consideration and look at the 2 that weren't scanned. I mean, that's not official, but
Right.
that would be kind of the methodology, I would say.
And CTPAT does have access to the database, scans database, so they know, what companies that scan did visit. But yeah, no, that's a fair assessment.
And BASC, I think, would fit in that same
Yeah.
category as far as risk mitigation. And I know we had that question earlier about high risk suppliers and who should I visit, kind of following through on your example, right, Sean, there. I mean, if you had 10 suppliers, 5 of which have undergone some sort of certification or security review, scan, BASC, whatever, you can probably discount those as being lower risk, and you'd want to focus on those that have not undergone any on-site verification, validation of the minimum security criteria. Over.
Great, thank you. Hey, Gordon, this one's great. This is a blast from the past. This is from Roxana from Barco in Belgium. Good morning. What changes and by the way, hello, Roxanne. I haven't seen you in years. It's nice to see your name here in the AEO context again. What changes or focus areas do you anticipate in future CTPAT/AEO requirements, especially for import-export industry in the manufacturing business of electronics and medical devices? And should companies start preparing now for increased scrutiny on ESG, forced labor, or geopolitical risk? I'm kicking that one to you, Gordon.
Thanks very much. And hello to Roxana. I remember this was one of the missions that you and I did together, Sean. Yeah, I remember we had a very interesting time with Barco and an interesting hotel check-in experience, I recall.
Yes.
But to answer the question, I would say that the areas to pay particular attention to are the new regulations in the EU related to green customs. We're still allowed to mention the climate and green customs in Europe, by the way. It's still allowable. So forced labor's part of that package. There's obviously the CBAM, the carbon offset mechanism. There's the deforestation regulation, and the one you mentioned, Roxana, the environmental, social, and governance. Although they haven't been incorporated into the AEO program in terms of set criteria, I suspect that will occur over the next couple of years or so as those regulations become more embedded. The level of detail that'll be there, I'm not quite sure what that will be, but they're certainly coming down the line. So I'd pay particular attention to that. Also, the big ticket item here in Europe is obviously sanctions, being able to ensure that you've got risk management processes in place to ensure that you're not involved in the import of export of goods subject to sanctions regulations. So that's the EU perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. And from the US perspective, I think I can speak for Brad and Rich. There are no significant changes to CTPAT requirements that we're aware of in the near future. So I would just leave it at that. And if you recall, in the US, changes to the CTPAT program in terms of minimum security criteria typically go through a process with the private sector through the Commercial Operations Advisory Committee. So that's not a quick process. So as far as we're aware of, nothing huge and new coming from CTPAT. So
Just
thank
one
you.
final thing, Sean, if I may, just one small
Absolutely.
comment. Roxana, I talked about the Trust and Check new AEO program coming along the line. That would be a good fit for your company. So if you're interested in it, feel free to reach back.
All right. Thank you. This one's for Rich and Brad. From your experience, what are the most common gaps you see in CTPAT for electronics manufacturers, importer, exporter, which actually connects back to a little bit to the barcode question, at least in terms of their operation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off. That's okay. Based on my time with CTPAT, from what I recall, several of the larger electronic manufacturers were tier three. Again, however, this doesn't necessarily mean that gaps weren't found. The larger companies, they had the resources to exceed the minimum security criteria, and it was really necessary because of, the high value and, the higher risk for theft. Everybody wants to steal electronics, it's just a, high demand. So, there was always, I always, when I did validations for the electronic companies, the security was always good because again, it's high value stuff, high demand. So, and I guess that's why many of the companies, achieved, tier three. But again, gaps do exist, and what I would say is risk assessment, business partner screening, training. Training has always been you always have to make sure that the training is up to date. But since the electronic companies may have a lot of different suppliers, that's where maybe some of the gaps again with how they're completing their risk assessment and how they're screening their business partners. But for the most part, when I went overseas, the security was very good because again, the product, it's high value product and high demand. I don't know, Brad, if you got something to add on that one.
Yeah, no, Rich, you covered most of what comes to my mind. I think the only my comment I think would be more global, not specific to electronics, but I would just say in today's current environment, tariffs, being increased, a lot of companies are changing sourcing, right? For countries for particular components, which is all fine and dandy, of course, but for the security team, make sure you're part of those discussions when procurement or whoever is thinking about resourcing, changing the sourcing, so that you can apply your that security lens to that particular supplier, MSC or whatnot. So changes in sourcing, I would keep in mind. And then just training, I would just flag, there's at a lot of manufacturing facilities, not just electronics, a lot of turnover. Some companies just look at security related training as one-off part of the onboarding process, end of story. Remember, CTPAT's going to look for reoccurring augmented training for employees throughout their tenure with the company. Couple of things to be alert to. Over.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to take one here related to security cameras. What is the requirement for the quality of the cameras? There's not a requirement for the definite, like a requirement for the definition of the cameras or capability. I believe the language, not in the MSC, but in the security profile, says something along the lines of the best possible quality. In this day and age, any system is going to be recording typically in high definition resolution of 720p or higher. And each time you upgrade cameras or upgrade your system, you should be upgrading that capability as well. But Rich, unless I'm missing something, there's no language that says you have to have 1080p cameras, nothing, no 4K cameras.
Nope, yep, nothing. I mean, it has to be clear, but again, there's no standard. It doesn't have to be a specific,
Right. At the end of the day, it needs to be good enough that if something happens, you can clearly make out what's on the footage, right? If it's all blurry, then it's not going to be of use to anybody.
Right.
All right, let's see, Rich and Brad, another one for you. And I think I answered this in short, but if you want to go into any additional information, will there be some changes to CTPAT regulations due to current world events?
Yeah, I mean, again, you definitely did answer it, not that we're aware of, but changes will happen when things happen. COVID is a perfect example, that we had to adapt it during COVID with the virtual validations. But again, nothing really aware that we're aware of. I mentioned, where CTPAT may be going, in the future with, modernizing processes, expanding membership, domestically and internationally. There was a GAO report that came out and where CTPAT needed to do a better job with security breaches. Again, it's that's the world we live in. These breaches occur every day now, and this GA report, identified some, gaps in CTPAT's procedures where they weren't looking into some of these breaches, and I'm not saying that's true because I was a director and we were looking into them. Maybe maybe we not all of them or the higher risk ones, but they were definitely being looked into. Let's put it that way. But as more breaches occur in the world we live in, procedures have to change, and CTPAT, we'll just have to adapt with it, and more investigations and a thorough job. But changes, any major changes, I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I just one story, probably not a game changer, but just to keep in mind, CTPAT's undertaking a pilot of allowing non-asset-based 3PLs as well as asset-based 3PLs that not already eligible under the existing 3PL eligibility criteria. That's a mouthful. I think 10 in each category. A few have been selected. This will start to CTPAT will start to work with those companies selected, and then make a decision at some point in time whether there is value added overall to allow those types of entities into the program. My guess is this will be a 2-3 year project to get to any definitive answer, but just a story to keep in the back of your mind to watch as time goes on. Over.
Thank you. All right, we're starting to come up on time here. We got 12 minutes left. Try to get through as many as we can. Rich, I'll try this, but probably need a little help from you. In India, the seal is not applied by any specific vendor or third party. Since the seal is authorized and affixed by the Customs Department of the Government of India, our business partners do not possess any independent certificate or log for it. May we consider this item complete? Well, if the government is responsible for that process of sealing the container, and they are not beholden to the traders to produce a certificate of certification of the ISO seals compliance. To me, I would think that you could just indicate this in the response in that section of the security profile, and that would probably be good enough for the supply chain security specialist. I don't know, Rich, if you have anything else.
Yeah, no, I would, again, if it's being put on by the government in India, like you said, Sean, I would just, reference that. I would assume that they're using the correct seals.
Right.
I mean, even if you can get hold of a seal, maybe, or after a seal is broken, after you receive the container, maybe you can get a hold of a seal and do your own check on it to make sure that it is a good seal. It's a high security seal, but I would think that they were using a high security seal or a seal that meets our standards.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if that's the process, that's the process. And,
Mhm.
CTPAT's not going to be able to tell the Indian government that they have to give you guys a certificate. So just doing what you can and making sure to document it. So, just stating clearly the situation in the response and your security profile for that particular seal requirement should suffice. Let's see here. We're a U.S. highway carrier. Our main facility is short on parking for drivers, personal vehicles. All drivers park in the yard in one designated section. We're short on parking space for drivers and do not have another area for them to park. How do we jump this hurdle to get CTPAT certified? Well, I mentioned this earlier in my physical security response to the physical security question. So separating your parking lot from personal vehicles to, trucks and where cargo is being loaded is a should, right? It's recommended and it's ideal. And the majority of companies can do this, but it's absolutely realistic that, due to the location of the facility and the nature of the area, that you may not have this ability. So that's when you look at the other layers of security that you have, your cameras, your access controls, if you have guards, certainly creating whatever kind of separation you can within that 1 yard so that and it sounds like you're doing that. So all of the personal vehicles are in one specific spot. It's not like there's a truck and then 3 cars and then 2 trucks. You want to avoid that. And again, cameras, and that should suffice, because at the end of the day, if you can't do it, you can't do it, and it's not actually a requirement. All right, here, Brad, I'm going to go to you. Beyond import security, how does CTPAT membership support EAR and ITAR export compliance obligations?
Yeah, got it, Sean. Export administration regulations, international traffic in arms. So I'm going to answer that question based upon some of my experience. I've conducted some training programs via the Department of State on strategic trade control programs, mostly for foreign government officials as well as certain foreign industries. Interestingly, the last program I did, it was a group in the Singapore, and it had to do with providing drone technology, Iranian drone technology, to Russia used in the Ukraine war. That being said, when you look at strategic trade controls and CTPAT, there's a lot of commonality, and I think this is the questioner's getting to this. The jargon may be a little different. I think in the strategic trade control world, the terminology is, know your customer, enhanced due diligence, but it really tracks with CTPAT business partner screening provisions. So I see overlap certainly there. Emphasis on documented policies, compliance responsibility, risk assessments, management oversight. Both, all of those apply in both of those worlds. Training, red flags, when you talk in the export world about red flags, a lot of it's very similar. Red flags regarding diversion of controlled technology, very similar to CTPAT red flags, right? Is it cash only transactions, or several intermediaries, vague receiving points, a lot of overlap there. So I get, it's kind of a thought question, but definitely I think both, a lot of commonality, a lot of common denominators as you go forward. Just keeping that in mind. There you go, Sean.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth and I'm trying to squeeze whatever we can in here. Rich and Brad, I like this question because I don't think I've heard it phrased like this. Is the use of body-worn cameras for traffic drivers legally allowed? I definitely have seen an increase in cameras that are inside the cab of trucks, but body-worn cameras, that's interesting. So I'll kick that over to you, Rich, to start, and Brad, if you want to add to it.
I think it's legal. Again, I'm not positive, but I would say it would be legal. if the driver agrees and that's the company policy, if the company says they have to be worn, and I think it's really just for safety. It's for safety concerns. Accidents. Can the footage be used for something else? I'm not aware. Say if the driver has it, and in the background there's a robbery being taken place. Can that footage be used? I don't know, but I would say can be used for, say, again, safety reasons, if it hijackings, accidents. But beyond that, I'm not sure if it would be legal, in a court of law, say. What do you think, Brad?
Nothing further. I think I would just underscore that voluntary part of
Mhm.
it. I think there has to be an agreement between the driver and the carrier to have that body worn camera.
Mhm.
And then you go from there. I really have nothing more to add on that one, unfortunately.
Right. I'm going to jump to one over here. The current company business partner questionnaire for risk assessment being used is outdated, and I would like to update it. Are there any good comprehensive templates available for companies to download and use as a guide to create their business partner questionnaire to be sent to non-CTPAT business partners? Yeah, that's a good question. This is one of these areas where I feel the program CTPAT could provide some better guidance and tools. So I have seen a lot of versions of this from a lot of different companies and consultants. We obviously at CT Strategies have one that we've developed, and pretty much every client we have, at least when we start working with them, they have their own version of it. So I guess the short answer is yes and no. Yes, there's a lot of different ones available. No, there's no sort of accepted single version of the template that is used throughout the network. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah. Miss Williams, your biggest fan here. You always ask great questions in our webinars. Thank you so much. The only thing I was going to add, and this may or may not be helpful, I know a lot of organizations, pharmaceutical industry, automotive industry, work to condense, synthesize those questionnaires down. That might be a lead for you as well, depending your particular industry and who you work with. But that's all I have to add. Thanks, Sean.
All right. Thank you, guys. I am going to throw one last question out there. We've got like 2 minutes. What is the recommendation when an upcoming validation and you need to update the security profile on site? Does the SCSS need to be alerted? I know it must have the latest, but lots of changes have happened from last year's security profile update. Okay, so if you have necessary updates that could impact your validation, then you should make those prior to the validation so that your security profile statements are accurate and reflect the current state of your operations. But do this if it's out of the normal annual cycle, do this in coordination with your supply chain security specialist, because they may tell you, okay, thanks for letting me know that. Duly noted. You don't have to update it yet. But I'll make sure that it doesn't trigger a recommendation or an action required during the validation now that I'm aware of it. Or they could say, yes, please make those changes, submit it to me, and I'll immediately approve it. So just coordinate that through your supply chain security specialist. All right, we have a handful of questions left that we will address via email after the webinar. Hallie, working in the background here under the CT Strategies window there, she will be sending out information after the session to include the remaining answers to your questions that we couldn't get to, and a link to the video recording of this training. I want to thank everybody for being so interactive, providing so many great questions. We really, really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be doing this again. I think we're kind of on a twice a year cycle with the Q&A webinars. Brad, Gordon, Rich, thank you guys very much. It's always a pleasure. Gordon, I know it's like quitting time on a Friday, so go get your glass of wine and start your weekend. And Hallie in the background, thank you very much. And I hope you all have a great weekend, and we see you next time. Take care.